Say hello to Nikon Z9. This is the first mirrorless full-frame camera not to have the mechanical shutter. It is a brand new flagship offering from Nikon that can shoot 20 photos per second in RAW, 30 photos per second in JPEG, and a whopping 120 photos in 11 megapixel resolution in JPEG 2. The camera can also handle 8K video recording internally in 10-bit 422 up to 2 hours and 3 minutes. The Z9 can track and detect 9 different subjects automatically, but does it deliver? Whenever a new product is launched, it has to fix problems from the previous version and also bring in new innovation. So what does this camera do? It can shoot 20 frames per second in lossless RAW. And this is the first full-frame flagship camera to not have a mechanical shutter. It is completely electronic now. It can record 8K resolution video up to 30 frames per second, and with the future firmware, somewhere we will be able to record 60 frames per second in 8K resolution. And when it comes to 8K 60p, it is not going to be a cropped 8K because we will need at least 33 megapixels to form an 8K image, but with just 45 megapixels if it's a crop, we will only get about 20 megapixels. So 8K 60p is going to be full frame, at least 1.3 times crop. Let's see, let's wait and see. But anyway, there are so many more things to talk about in this camera. Let's do one by one. The camera can take dual cards, which is either XQD or CF Express Type B cards in both the slots. Even if you are using XQD card, you can still record 8K video up to 30 frames per second. There is no limitation on that. I mean, anything you can do with the CF Express Type B card, you can do with XQD card as well. There is absolutely no restrictions whatsoever. That's 20 frames per second. Yeah, uninterrupted shooting. Yeah, the camera is absolutely silent. We have absolutely no sound at all. And if you want, you can add sounds, which is just a fake simulation of a shutter sound. Before we get to the cream of the review, I need to talk about the electronic viewfinder on this camera. The lag is absolutely eliminated, almost not there, because it's not optical viewfinder, it's not at light speed. There is always going to be some lag. Even if you get the best processor in the world, it is going to be laggy a little bit. But when I view through the viewfinder, I don't feel like I'm using an electronic viewfinder at all. It is very much like an optical viewfinder, and it is truly amazing to see that, because Nikon has this new dual stream technology which takes like two streams of data, one for capturing images or recording data or recording videos, and the other one dedicated to the electronic viewfinder. Even when you take a picture, there is no interruption. Absolutely no interruption. It doesn't black out. You don't see any repeated frames. You don't see any jitters. You don't see any kind of funky things going on inside the electronic viewfinder. It is totally seamless, is what I'm trying to say. So you need to try using the electronic viewfinder on this camera to truly appreciate how good it really is. It is hard to explain with words. Let's talk about the autofocus performance now. With 495 autofocus points, the same as the Z7 II, the Z9 is sensitive up to minus 8.5 exposure value, which is quite dark. The autofocus performance is not restricted to just human faces and eyes. It can detect up to 9 different subjects. Starting from human faces and eyes and all that, that's fine. And we can do bird eye autofocus, we can do animal eye autofocus for cats and dogs, we can do planes, trains and automobiles, bicycles and motorbikes. I tested this camera with the 7200 2.8 S lens, the native Z mount lens on this camera. This sequence was shot with that lens at 200 millimeters, wide open at f2.8 at 120 frames per second burst rate. Out of 494 photos were in sharp focus. Absolutely nailed the eye, all the frames. And same way, this sequence had 698 photos, and out of 698 photos, all of them were in pin sharp focus right on the eye. If you use a slow focusing lens, do not expect that hit rate. It is going to significantly drop. It happened to me too. But if you're using a really fast focusing lens, the hit rate is phenomenal. The hit rate is fantastic on this camera. It is like no other Nikon camera I've ever used. So the autofocus is brilliant when it comes to human faces and eye detection. That is absolutely fantastic. And this is another sequence with 145 pictures, not in 120 frames per second, but just 20 frames per second burst rate. Out of 145 pictures, I got 143 pictures in sharp focus. Apart from that, the hit rate is consistently over 96% with whatever I tested with bird photography and also human eye photography. So this camera is meant for speed, okay? So please use fast focusing lenses like the 7200 f2.8, the 400 f2.8, 600 f4, or the 120 to 300 f2.8. All these are really fast focusing lenses. The back LCD screen now flips and swivels in favor of the vertical grip usage. It doesn't flip out as a vlogging camera, which this isn't. No big deal in my opinion. There is a huge influence in the YouTube community that flip out screen is the best design to have. Not every camera requires a flip out screen. I have very limited experience when it comes to bird photography, so I was completely reliant on the technology this camera could offer me. So I'm not a bird photography specialist or anything of the sort. So I was just trying to keep up with the birds and trying to focus on the birds, and that's it. I don't even know the names of the birds, so please bear with me if I sound ridiculous when it comes to bird photography. These shots were all done in 20 fps using a 200 and 500 5.6 VR lens, of course at 500mm handheld. I chose to use the 3D tracking. Once I pick the subject with the tracking box, that's it. The camera keeps up with the bird all the time. The lens is not one of the fastest focusing lenses. Still, the results were pretty good. The Z9 is not just a photography camera, it can also record brilliant videos. It truly shines in video spec as well. The Z9 can record in 8K resolution videos up to 30p and 4K up to 120p and Full HD up to 120p. We don't need any external recorders anymore. All these can be recorded internally to RCF Express Type B cards or XQD cards. We can now shoot in H.264, H.265 and ProRes HQ internally in 422 compression. The H.264 can only be used on full HD resolution, whereas for higher resolutions such as UHD and 8K, we can only use H.265 compression. You can shoot N-Log and HLG only in 10-bit color depth. There isn't any 8-bit log recording in this camera. There are a little bit more quirks when it comes to video resolution and frame rates. You can record videos in full frame mode and in DX crop mode. When you're recording 4K 120p, you can record in full frame. And when it comes to DX, it is not a 1.5 times crop, it's a whopping 2.3 times crop, which is the actual surface area of a DX crop, actually speaking. But the other DX is just on the focal length. So it's a little bit confusing, but if you start using it, you'll get used to it. If you're shooting wildlife videos, I think the extra reach could come in handy, but still the 4K 120 FPS looks really good. It's not as sharp as the 4K 24 or 4K 60p, which are oversampled from the 8K sensor, but 4K 120 looks a little bit compressed, but if you don't compare them side by side, you won't see a difference at all. The resolution is really good and the clarity is brilliant. The 8K image looks delicious. It is sharp, it's crystal clear, and it's beautiful to look at. And Nikon claims you can record 8K continuously without any overheating problems up to 2 hours and 3 minutes. Like I told you, I only have a 64GB XQD card and I cannot run 8K video for 2 hours with that card or space. So I'm sorry, I did not do that test, but when I get the bigger cards, the CF Express Type G cards, I'll surely make a video on that too. But now I'm restricted to just 64GB XQD card. The video continuous autofocus is smooth, confident and reliable on this camera. It is more confident in shifting focus and tracking subjects. More importantly, when used with native lenses, the speed settings are obeyed properly. Slow makes slow focus pulse and fast makes quick rack focus. While testing the human face tracking in 4K 120p, this was the result. The autofocus works awesome. It just keeps up with the eye all the time, and it's the same case even with 8K video. And you might be wondering what's the difference between a 4K 120p video and the 120 frames per second photo, right? There are quite a few differences. One is a JPEG compression, the other one is H.265 compression. And more importantly, the 4K 120p is restricted to 16:9 aspect ratio, whereas the 120 frames per second JPEG is a full sensor readout, which is 3:2 aspect ratio. So you get more pixels and more resolution there. To my eyes, the quality of the JPEG looks better than the screen grabs from 4K video. Beyond autofocus, Nikon had to fix quite a few problems because it has removed the mechanical shutter, right? One is banding. I don't have access to all kinds of lights in the world, but some lights that we use are truly cheap and bad. So we have tried how this camera performs in that lighting situation as well, and the camera has done pretty well when it comes to even at high frames per second. No, even if you're shooting at 20 frames per second or 30 frames per second, you don't see the flicker in any frame. That is truly awesome. Nikon claims it has the fastest sensor readout of any mirrorless camera right now in the market. And reading out a 45 megapixel sensor every second for 120 times is not easy as well. Thanks to the stacked CMOS BSI sensor, I wouldn't say there is no rolling shutter because it's impossible, at least mathematically, to get rid of it. But I would say it is not distracting. And even in photos, it is virtually not there at all. So I did not see any funky bending or banding or anything of the sort when it comes to fast action photography using electronic shutter. Hats off. We were truly worried because of the absence of the mechanical shutter. It could open a new can of worms when it comes to flash photography, because the maximum sync speed on this camera is 1/200, but you can still use flashes enabled with high-speed syncs up to 1/8000 on this camera. Truly awesome. So that problem is eliminated as well. The Z9 is also capable of doing 5 to 6 stops of stabilization with native lenses. The in-body stabilization with the FTC adapters is about 4 to 5 stops. These batteries are massive, these batteries are expensive, and these batteries have a lot of juice. It just keeps going on and on, though it is such a power demanding camera. Can't really talk about the dynamic range right now as we don't have RAW support yet on Adobe softwares. I'm still not used to the NX Studio D software from Nikon as well. So have shot a lot of raw photos for future videos, though. We'll talk about that later. And it goes without saying, the camera is built like a tank and it is completely weather sealed. We get a sensor shield when we change lenses when the camera is turned off. So these are our first impressions using the Nikon Z9. This is a pre-production model. That means there could be improvements in the actual production model as well. Thanks to Nikon India and Satyanarayana for making this arrangement happen, and more importantly, giving us the freedom to talk whatever we want. That is very important than sending the camera itself. Freedom is priceless. Thank you so much for sending this camera to us, and truly hope this was of some use to you. And this camera costs 4,75,000 rupees in India. I hope this video helped you make some decisions. I'll meet you guys in the next video. Until then,